Moving is fun, they say. They are liars. Professional, grade A, card-carrying liars who probably also enjoy assembling IKEA furniture with hieroglyphic instructions and doing their own taxes for the sheer thrill of it. Every single box I sliced open was a little cardboard time capsule of bad decisions and forgotten hobbies. Did I really need a quesadilla maker back in 2018? Apparently, that version of me, a younger, more optimistic man with significantly less back pain, considered it an essential tool for survival. Now, 2025 Alex, a man who pays a mortgage in a neighborhood where the grass is literally greener than my financial envy, had to find a place for the cursed thing. I surveyed my new kingdom. It was a kingdom of chaos, a fortress of cardboard and packing tape. The air, thick with the smell of fresh paint and the faint, dusty scent of a house that had been empty for a few weeks, felt heavy with potential and the promise of impending chores. This was it. Sunnyvale Estates. It even sounded deceptively pleasant, like a retirement community for unusually cheerful dentists. We'd left our cramped third-floor apartment in the city for this, a slice of the suburban American dream in the heart of Texas, complete with a 2-car garage, a sprawling live oak in the front yard, and the crown jewel, the entire reason for this Herculean effort, a shimmering, turquoise pool in the back. Find the box with the pool noodles yet, Dad? I turned. My daughter, Maya, navigated her wheelchair through a canyon of boxes with the practiced ease of a rally car driver. At 12, she possessed a wit sharper than the box cutter in my hand, and a spirit that refused to be dampened by the curveballs life had thrown her way. Muscular dystrophy is a thief. It creeps in and slowly steals things first, the ability to run, then to walk, and now it demanded the chair. But it hadn't touched her sarcastic humor, which she shared with me like a sacred inheritance. I have a mighty need to float aimlessly, she announced, her eyes already fixed on the backyard through the sliding glass doors. Patience, my little fish, I said, striking a dramatic pose. First, we must appease the gods of home organization. The ancient prophecy foretells that only when the last roll of bubble wrap is popped can we achieve true poolside nirvana. She rolled her eyes so hard I swear I heard them click. You're a dork. Yeah, but I'm a dork with a pool. That makes me, what, a cool dork? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, she quipped, but a genuine, brilliant smile spread across her face. That smile was the whole point. This house, this move, this mountain of debt was all for that. The pool was more than just a luxury, it was a lifeline. Her physical therapist had been adamant that swimming was the best possible exercise for her, a way to maintain muscle tone and stay active in a low-impact environment. More than that, it was a place of freedom. In the water, she wasn't the girl in the wheelchair. She was just a kid, floating, splashing, free from the weight of it all. Later that afternoon, while wrestling with a box labeled Misk, Kitchen Stuff, the most terrifying label known to man, I found the welcome packet. The Sunnyvale Estates Homeowners Association welcomes you. The font was a cheerful, vaguely threatening cursive that screamed passive aggression. The packet was thicker than my car's owner's manual and at least twice as confusing. I started flicking through the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the hallowed CCRs. My eyes glazed over. Rules about trash can placement, rules about the exact shade of beige your gutters were allowed to be, rules about lawn maintenance schedules. Then I landed on one that made me snort. Rule 7, subsection B, paragraph 4. All garden gnomes must not exceed 12 inches in height and must be of a whimsical, non-threatening disposition. I didn't even know gnomes had dispositions. Was there a clandestine market for menacing, intimidating gnomes that I wasn't aware of? Was I living in a neighborhood or a meticulously curated museum of suburban mediocrity? Shaking my head, I tossed the binder onto a counter already cluttered with the ghosts of kitchens past. It didn't matter. We had our house, our yard, and our pool. I looked out the window at Maya, who had wheeled herself onto the patio and was just staring at the water, her expression full of hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt a deep, uncomplicated sense of peace. I had done something right. That feeling lasted for about 48 hours. I was in the front yard, locked in a sweaty, primal battle with the assembly instructions for a new gas grill. The instructions, clearly translated from Swedish to Mandarin and then to English by a malfunctioning robot, showed a diagram where Part F was supposed to magically phase through Part G. As I contemplated setting the whole thing on fire and just roasting hot dogs over the flames, I felt a presence. A shadow fell over me. I looked up. A woman in her late 50s was marching across my new lawn with the purposeful stride of a drill sergeant about to inspect the barracks. She was a vision in suburban armor, a stark white visor pulled down low, immaculate tennis shorts, and a crisp polo shirt with a small, tasteful HOA logo embroidered on the chest. In her hand, she held a clipboard. A clipboard. Nothing good ever comes from a civilian holding a clipboard. "You must be the new owner of 114 Willow Creek Lane," she stated. It wasn't a question. I wiped a smear of grease and sweat from my forehead. "That's me, Alex. Just moved in." "Carol Brewster, 112, she said, gesturing with her chin to the house next door, a mirror image of mine, but with an unnerving, surgically precise lawn. "I'm the head of the Architectural Review Committee for the HOA. She didn't offer a handshake, she offered a title. Her welcome was less of a greeting and more of a surprise audit. "Ah, the Arc," I said, trying to sound like I knew what that meant. "Nice to meet you. I just wanted to drop by and personally ensure you received the welcome packet and the covenants, conditions, and restrictions." "Oh, yeah, the book," I said with a folksy grin. "Got it. Still working my way through it. Some light reading before bed." Carol did not get the joke. Her expression remained as flat and unforgiving as a concrete slab. "It's not reading, it's the law of the community, the rules we all agree to live by to protect our shared investment." Her eyes flicked from me to the curb. "I noticed your recycling bin was left out for 3 hours past the designated 7 p.m. retrieval time yesterday." I blinked. I was being cited. I hadn't even finished unpacking. "Sorry, we were still bringing boxes in. I must have lost track of time." "The rules are in place to maintain our community's aesthetic and property values," she recited, as if reading from an invisible teleprompter. "A tidy curb is a happy curb. I'll let it slide this time. A welcome to the neighborhood warning, if you will." She actually made air quotes with her fingers when she said, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Her gaze then swept across my domain, a laser-like scrutiny that missed nothing. The grill, half-assembled and looking vaguely pathetic. The flower beds, still bare and waiting for plants. The moving van, which was parked perfectly legally on the street. Her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line, and she made a small, decisive tick mark on her clipboard. For all I knew, I'd just been cited for excessive newness. "Have a nice day," she said, the words clipped and devoid of any actual warmth. She pivoted on her pristine white sneakers and marched back to her own property, the clipboard held firmly at her side. I stood there for a long moment, grill wrench in hand, utterly bewildered. I had lived in apartment buildings where my neighbors set off fireworks in the hallway and treated the fire alarm as a weekly social gathering. This was a whole new level of strange. Shaking my head, I decided to chalk it up to an overzealous, deeply bored woman with a touch of OCD. The first shadow had fallen across my new paradise, but surely it was just a passing cloud. A week later, the real storm began to gather. The reason for all of this, the centerpiece of our new life, was scheduled for installation. I had hired a company that specialized in accessibility modifications, and their top installer, a guy named Gus, arrived right on time. Gus was the physical and spiritual opposite of Carol. He was a big, friendly man with a salt-of-the-earth demeanor, calloused hands that spoke of honest work, and a smile that reached his eyes. He and his crew got to work immediately, their professionalism, a quiet ballet of drills, levels, and quiet conversation. He walked me through the pool lift's features. "This here is the Aqua Joy 5000, he said, patting the gleaming white arm of the machine. "Best on the market, bolted right into the concrete deck, 4 inches deep. It's not going anywhere. Fully ADA-compliant, waterproof remote, multiple safety locks. It's a great piece of equipment. Gonna make a world of difference for your little girl." "That's the plan," I said, unable to keep the grin off my face. "She's been talking about it all week, picked out a new swimsuit and everything." As his team carefully sealed the bolts, Gus leaned in, lowering his voice. "Just a heads up," he said, nodding subtly towards Carol's house next door. "You run this by the HOA?" A small knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. "It's medical equipment," I said, suddenly less certain. "It's for my daughter's disability. I didn't think I needed permission to help her get in the pool." Gus nodded sagely. "You don't. Not legally. Federal law trumps HOA nonsense every time when it comes to this stuff. The Fair Housing Act is crystal clear about reasonable accommodations. He paused, wiping his hands on a rag. But that lady over there? He gestured with his head towards Carol's pristine fortress. She's a special one. We did a patio extension on this block last year. She measured the contractor's truck with a tape measure to make sure it wasn't over the neighborhood's commercial vehicle length limit. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. You're kidding. Nope, Gus said, his expression grimly serious. Said it was blocking the visual flow of the street. Just be ready for some feedback is all I'm saying. An hour later, the job was done. The lift was perfect. It was sleek, white, and functional. It didn't look like a toy or a gaudy accessory. It looked exactly like what it was. A clean, professional, essential piece of accessibility hardware. I paid Gus, shook his hand gratefully, and watched them drive away. I felt a surge of pride. Let Carol measure whatever she wanted. No reasonable person could possibly object to this. I was so naive. So naive. 3 days later, I was sorting through a pile of mail bills, junk mail, another bill when I saw it. A crisp, cream-colored envelope with the Sunnyvale Estates HOA logo embossed on the front. It felt ominously heavy in my hand. You know that specific, gut-sinking feeling you get when you see a police car behind you, even when you're not speeding? That's the feeling I got holding that envelope. It was the stationary equivalent of flashing red and blue lights. My crime? I had no idea, but I was pretty sure Carol was the reporting officer. With a deep breath, I sliced it open. My eyes scanned the formal, impersonal text. Official notice of violation. Subject: unauthorized structural addition to property 114 Willow Creek Lane. My blood started to simmer. Description: it has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that an unapproved permanent structure, metallic pool apparatus, has been installed on your property. Per CCR's Article 9, Section 3, all permanent outdoor structures must be submitted for review and approval by the ARC prior to installation to ensure they align with the community's aesthetic standards and do not negatively impact neighborhood property values. This structure is deemed unsightly and out of character with the community's design. Apparatus? Unsightly? They were talking about a piece of medical equipment designed to give my child a semblance of a normal life. The simmering in my veins turned to a low boil. Then came the demand. The letter ordered the immediate removal of the apparatus within 14 days. Failure to comply would result in daily fines of $100, retroactive to the date of the notice. It was signed by the Sunnyvale Estates HOA board. But there, at the very bottom, in a font that practically oozed smugness, was the source of the poison. Notice filed by Carol Brewster, head of ARC. I crushed the letter in my fist. The paper crinkled in protest. The war, it seemed, had been officially declared. I looked out the back window at the beautiful, gleaming pool lift, a symbol of hope and freedom for my daughter. Then my gaze drifted next door, to the house where the Queen of Beige reigned supreme. Oh, it was on. It was so on. My first move was to try diplomacy. I was still clinging to the foolish hope that this was all just a big bureaucratic misunderstanding that could be cleared up by a simple conversation between two reasonable adults. I smoothed out the crumpled violation letter, found the number for the HOA management company, and dialed. After navigating a phone tree clearly designed by a sadist, I was rewarded with a 10-minute on-hold serenade of a tinny, synthesized version of Vivaldi's Spring. It was the kind of music that plays in your head as your sanity slowly unravels. I used the time to prepare my speech. I'd be the bigger man. I'd be calm, cool, and collected. I'd explain the situation with the soothing, rational voice of a hostage negotiator talking someone off a ledge. Hello. I'd practice in my head. I think there's been a simple mix-up regarding some life-changing medical equipment for my disabled child. Surely we can sort this out. Sunnyvale HOA, this is Bob. The voice on the other end was weary, as if it were powered by sighs and quiet desperation. Hi, Bob. This is Alex from 114 Willow Creek Lane. I'm calling about a violation notice I received for my pool lift. A heavy sigh crackled through the phone. Ah, yes, Bob said, the resignation in his voice palpable. The apparatus. Carol brought it up at our last meeting, and the meeting before that, when she heard it was being installed, and she sent several emails with photos. Right, I said, my calm resolve already cracking. Well, just to be clear, it's not an apparatus. It's an HOA-compliant medical lift for my daughter, Maya. She's in a wheelchair. It's for her physical therapy. I laid the disability and therapy cards on the table, assuming they were trump cards. Look, I get it, I do, Bob said, and I could already hear the but coming. But rules are rules. Carol is very passionate about the rules. She says it's an eyesore. Did you submit an application to the ARC before you installed it? An application for my daughter's mobility? No, Bob, I didn't. Because the Americans with Disabilities Act protects this. It's what's known as a required reasonable accommodation. Federal law. I said the last two words slowly, as if they were magical incantations. Another sigh, this one heavier than the last. The thing is, Alex, the bylaws say all permanent structures. It doesn't mention any exceptions for, that sort of thing. My hands are tied. The committee has to approve it. You can fill out a retroactive application and appeal at the next monthly meeting, but until then, the violation stands. Officially, you need to remove it or start paying the fines. My jaw tightened. So you're telling me that your neighborhood rule about aesthetics is more important than a federal law about disability rights? I'm just telling you what the process is, Bob said, his voice taking on the flat tone of a man who just wanted to get off the phone and go back to watching daytime television. It's out of my hands. I realized I was talking to a wall. A spineless, bureaucratic wall. The HOA wasn't a thinking entity. It was a mindless machine powered by the whims of my neighbor and operated by a man with the structural integrity of a chocolate eclair. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret, or more accurately, something I would absolutely not regret, but that would be counterproductive at this stage. Diplomacy had failed. It was time for a more direct approach. The confrontation I was expecting came a few days later, but not in the way I anticipated. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon. The Texas sun was bright but not yet scorching, and for the first time, Maya was going to use the lift. I went over the instructions with her, showing her how to use the waterproof remote. Her face was a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I carefully helped her transfer from her chair to the seat of the lift. With a gentle whirring sound, the arm of the lift swung out over the water. She let out a small gasp of delight. "Ready?" I asked, my hand hovering over the button. She nodded, beaming. "Ready." I pressed the button, and the lift smoothly began its descent. She was laughing, a pure, joyous sound that echoed in the backyard. The moment her feet touched the cool water, she sighed in contentment. This was it. This was the reason for every box, every penny, every ounce of stress. This single perfect moment of happiness for my daughter. Ahem. The sound was loud, sharp, and pointed. It sliced through the joyful atmosphere like a knife. I turned. There, standing at the fence line that separated our properties, was Carol. Arms crossed. Visor pulled low. Her face was a thundercloud of disapproval. She was glaring at the scene, at my laughing daughter in the pool, at the mechanical arm that had put her there, with utter contempt. Trying to keep my voice even for Maya's sake, I walked over to the fence. "Can I help you, Carol? I see you haven't taken that thing down yet," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "The 14 days are ticking." I took a deep breath. "Be the bigger man, Alex." For Maya. "Carol, this is my daughter, Maya." I gestured towards the pool. "This lift is for her. As I tried to explain to Bob on the phone, it's a medical necessity." Carol's eyes flickered toward Maya, who had stopped splashing and was now watching us, her smile gone. Carol's expression held a flicker of something, but it wasn't sympathy. It was annoyance, as if my daughter's disability was a personal inconvenience to her. "That's very unfortunate for her," she said, the words stunningly cold. "But it doesn't change the community bylaws. It's an eyesore. It's industrial looking. My guests can see it from my sunroom. It's affecting the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony." I stared at her, dumbfounded. Aesthetic harmony? The phrase was so absurd, so utterly divorced from the reality of the situation, I almost laughed. "Carol, my daughter is swimming, really swimming, for the first time in a year. That's the only harmony I care about. There are community pools with those facilities," she sniffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Perhaps you should have considered that before you bought a home here. We have standards. If we let one person bend the rules for their personal issues, It's a slippery slope. First, a pool lift. Then what? People painting their houses purple? It's about protecting our investment. I looked back at the pool. Maya had gone quiet. She was trying to make herself small, her shoulders hunched. The joy had been completely drained from her face, replaced by a look of profound hurt and embarrassment. "Dad?" she said, her voice small. "Can I get out now?" That was it. The snap was audible, at least in my head. A switch flipped. This was no longer about a stupid rule, a violation notice, or an ugly piece of metal. This woman, this petty tyrant of the suburbs, had just made my child feel ashamed of her own disability. She had stolen that perfect moment of joy and stomped on it with her pristine white tennis shoes. The gloves weren't just off, they were incinerated. I helped Maya out of the pool, wrapped her in a big, fluffy towel, and got her settled inside. My face was a mask of cold fury. I walked back out to the patio and stared at the fence where Carol had been standing. She was gone, of course, having dropped her grenade and retreated to her bunker. This wasn't a fight about property values anymore. This was personal, and I was going to finish it. Carol's next move was an escalation I hadn't anticipated. It was a Saturday afternoon a week later. I was in the garage trying to figure out how to organize a decade's worth of accumulated tools when I heard a firm knock on the front door. I opened it to find two police officers standing on my porch. One was older, with a mustache and weary eyes that suggested he'd seen it all. The other was younger, with a ramrod-straight posture and an earnest expression. "Alex, last name?" the older one, Officer Miller, asked. "That's me," I said, my heart rate kicking up a notch. "Everything okay?" "We received a call, sir," he said, his tone studiously neutral. "A complaint from a neighbor about a disturbance. Mentioned some possible illegal construction creating a safety hazard for neighborhood children." I had to physically restrain myself from laughing in their faces. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, who had made that call. Illegal construction? Did she think I was building a nuclear silo back there? I half expected them to ask if I had the proper permits for Maya's water wings. The sheer, unmitigated gall of this woman was almost impressive. It was like watching a peacock try to fight a freight train. You know it's going to end badly, but you can't look away from the beautiful, idiotic spectacle of the feathers. "A safety hazard?" I repeated, keeping my voice calm. "Officers, please come in. Let me show you the illegal construction." I led them through the house and into the backyard. Maya was sitting on a lounge chair on the patio, deeply engrossed in a book. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise at the sight of two uniformed officers walking past her. "This is it, officers," I said, gesturing dramatically to the pool lift. "This is the public menace. It's a pool lift. For my daughter." I pointed to Maya, who gave a small, shy wave. "She has muscular dystrophy." Officer Miller looked at the lift. He looked at Maya, happily reading her book. He looked at his younger partner, Officer Davis, and let out a long, slow, suffering sigh. It was the sigh of a man who was profoundly tired of petty neighborhood squabbles. "The reporting party, ma'am? On the phone?" he said, carefully avoiding Carol's name but rolling his eyes in a way that made it obvious. "Said you were drilling at all hours of the night, and that this thing was an unsecured danger to any children who might wander into your yard. It was installed by a licensed and insured contractor over 2 weeks ago," I replied, my voice level. "The installation took them about 3 hours, between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. It has multiple safety locks and can't even be operated without a key. The only child it's for is sitting right there, and I assure you, she has my full permission to be in the yard." The younger officer, Davis, smiled kindly. He knelt down beside Maya's chair. "What are you reading there?" he asked gently. As Maya started telling him about her fantasy novel, Officer Miller gave me a look that was pure apology. "Sir, I'm sorry to have bothered you. We have to respond to every call we get, but it's pretty clear there's no criminal issue here. This is a civil matter between you and your HOA." He lowered his voice slightly. "My advice? Document everything. Every letter, every conversation. Especially this one. Get a record of this visit." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate that," I said. As I walked them back to the front door, I caught a glimpse of movement next door. There was Carol, conveniently watering her perfectly manicured petunias, watching the entire scene with a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought her plan had worked. As the officers got into their patrol car, Officer Miller, who had clearly seen her, paused and gave her a long, hard stare. He shook his head slowly in disapproval before getting in the car and driving away. Carol's smug look faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and indignation. The police visit, meant to intimidate me, had backfired spectacularly. I now had an official event to add to my growing file of harassment. Carol had overplayed her hand. She had tried to use the police as her personal army, and they had seen right through her. I felt emboldened. The tide was beginning to turn. That night, I declared war. I was in my home office, which was really just a corner of the spare bedroom. The desk was a battlefield. On one side was the enemy, the thick HOA bylaws binder, a growing stack of daily fine notices now totaling a ridiculous 700 and the original violation letter. On the other side was my arsenal, my laptop, a half-empty mug of coffee, and a burning sense of righteous fury. I was at a low point. The fines were absurd, but the principle of it was infuriating. I felt trapped and frustrated. I looked at a framed photo of Maya on the desk, her face lit up with that brilliant smile. This whole mess was casting a shadow over the new life I had tried to build for her. I felt like I was failing. But then, the frustration curdled into something else. Determination. I wasn't going to let some busybody with a clipboard and a god complex ruin this for my daughter. I turned to my laptop and started digging. I didn't just Google. I went on a deep dive expedition into the Mariana Trench of the internet. My search terms were a litany of my frustrations. OA disability discrimination. FHA versus OA rules. Reasonable accommodation for pool access. Can O fine me for medical equipment? I went down a rabbit hole of legal forums, disability advocacy group websites, and dry, dense government pages. It was like learning a new language, an alphabet soup of acronyms. ADA, FHA, HUD. But the more I read, the more the letters started to arrange themselves into a sentence, and that sentence was, "You're about to get wrecked, Carol." I felt a thrill, the kind you get when you're piecing together a puzzle and you finally see the whole picture. I wasn't just looking for a defense anymore, I was forging a sword. And then, I found it. The Motherlode. A clear, unambiguous, beautifully written section of the Fair Housing Act, FHA. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that housing providers and, yes, that explicitly included, homeowners associations must provide reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. The law went on to define a reasonable accommodation as a change in rules, policies, practices, or services. It also covered reasonable modifications, which were structural changes to a property, like, say, installing a ramp or a pool lift. The law was a thing of beauty. It specified that the resident pays for the modification, which I had done. It specified that the modification must be, well, reasonable, which it was. And then came the kill shot. The law explicitly states that aesthetic concerns or a desire to maintain a uniform appearance are not valid reasons to deny such a request. But wait, there was more. I kept reading, my heart pounding with adrenaline. The FHA also makes it illegal for anyone to coerce, intimidate, threaten, or interfere with any person exercising their rights under the Act. That included filing retaliatory, baseless complaints to law enforcement. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Carol hadn't just broken an HOA bylaw. She and the spineless HOA board had, with their letters, their fines, and their 911 call, potentially broken federal law. I scrolled down the page and found what I was looking for, the contact information for the regional office of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, the federal agency responsible for enforcing the Fair Housing Act. I bookmarked the page. I saved the phone number. I copied the email address. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The balance of power in Sunnyvale Estates was about to experience a seismic shift. And I was going to be the earthquake. The next morning, I was a man with a mission. I sat at my desk, the coffee tasting like sweet victory before a single shot had even been fired. I took a deep breath and dialed the number for the regional HUD office. I was expecting another bureaucratic nightmare, but the woman who answered was professional and efficient. I explained that I wanted to file a housing discrimination complaint. She transferred me to a case intake specialist. I laid it all out. Calmly, methodically, I told him the entire story, from the day we moved in to the police visit. I gave him dates, times, and names. I mentioned the unsightly apparatus, the demand for removal, the daily fines, the soul-crushing conversation with Bob the President, Carol's speech about aesthetic harmony, and the grand finale of the bogus 911 call. As I spoke, I emailed him the evidence I had compiled, a scanned copy of the violation notice, photos of the lift, a summary of the police visit, and the stack of fine notifications. The specialist listened patiently, only interrupting to ask clarifying questions. When I was done, there was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Last name, he said finally, his voice now devoid of its earlier neutrality and tinged with something that sounded like professional outrage. Based on everything you've told me and the documents you've sent, this is a textbook example of a potential violation of the Fair Housing Act. We are officially opening an investigation. He gave me a case number, a beautiful string of letters and numbers that felt like a shield and a weapon all at once. He told me my case was being assigned to a senior investigator named Ms. Albright, who would be in contact with me, and more importantly, with my HOA. After I hung up, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. It was like I had been carrying a massive weight and had just handed it over to a team of professional weightlifters. But I wasn't done yet. It was time to light the fuse. I opened a new email. In the tow field, I typed Bob the President's email address. In the CC field, I added the email addresses for every single member of the HOA board, which I had gleefully harvested from their Meet the Board page on the community website. Then, I composed my masterpiece. It was short, professional, and utterly terrifying. Internal monologue. I wanted to write, "Hey Bob, remember me? The guy with the disabled kid you blew off? Well, I called your bluff and raised you the full might of the U.S. federal government. Have fun with the audit, you spineless jellyfish. P.S. Carol is a monster." But I restrained myself. The actual email was much better. Subject: formal notice of FHA violation and pending federal investigation, case number 114 Willow Creek Lane. Body: Dear Bob and the Sunnyvale Estates HOA Board, this email is to formally notify you that your continued refusal to recognize my daughter's ADA-compliant pool lift as a reasonable accommodation constitutes a direct violation of the Fair Housing Act, 42 U.S. Code Section 3604. Your violation notice dated, date, subsequent and ongoing fines, and continued harassment, including a retaliatory and frivolous police report filed on date, have been reported to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. My official case number is case number. An investigator from their Fair Housing Enforcement Office, Ms. Albright, will be in contact with you shortly to discuss this matter. This includes a full investigation into the actions of the board and its committees, and the potential for significant civil penalties and legal fees to be levied against the HOA as prescribed by federal law. Consequently, all fines levied against me are illegal and will be disregarded. I expect your full and immediate cooperation with the forthcoming federal investigation. Sincerely, Alex, last name. I read it over once, twice. It was perfect. With a deep sense of satisfaction, I clicked send. I imagined the notification popping up on Bob's computer, the cascade of calls and panicked emails that would follow. The trap was sprung. The ball was no longer in my court. It was in the court of the United States government. I had turned their petty bureaucratic weapon, the rules, back on them with a much, much bigger one. The panic was almost immediate. Less than an hour after I sent the email, I got a call from a frantic-sounding Bob. "Alex, we got your email," he stammered. "I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. We had no idea." "You had every idea, Bob," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I told you it was a reasonable accommodation under federal law. You told me your hands were tied. Well, a federal investigator is about to untie them for you." He sputtered something about calling an emergency board meeting. I told him that was a great idea and that they should probably get their lawyer on the phone too. Then I hung up. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening in the community's clubhouse, a sterile, beige room with a long formica table and the faint smell of stale coffee. I arrived a few minutes early, dressed in a collared shirt, and my best "I am calm and have the law on my side" expression. They were all there. Bob the President, looking green around the gills. Two other board members, a man and a woman who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth, were staring intently at their empty notepads. And at the end of the table, sitting ramrod straight, was Carol. She was clutching her binder of HOA bylaws to her chest like it was a holy text, her face a mask of defiant rage. They thought this meeting was for them to gang up on me, to intimidate me into dropping the federal complaint. They had no idea what was coming. I sat down opposite them, placed my phone on the table to record the audio, as was my legal right in my state, and waited. Bob cleared his throat, shuffling some papers. "Alex," he began, his voice attempting a stern tone that just came out as squeaky. "We've called this meeting to discuss this unfortunate escalation. We really feel this could have been handled internally, without getting outside parties involved." "I tried that, Bob," I said calmly. "You told me your hands were tied." Just as Carol opened her mouth to launch into what I was sure would be a tirade about aesthetic harmony, the door to the clubhouse opened. A woman in a sharp, dark gray business suit walked in. She had an air of quiet, unshakable authority. She wasn't angry or loud. She was something far more terrifying: competent. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the flustered-looking man at the head of the table. "Are you Mr. Robert Prentice, president of the Sunnyvale Estates Homeowners Association?" she asked. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried the weight of the institution she represented. Bob paled, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes? Who are you?" "My name is Eleanor Albright," she said, pulling a chair out and sitting down at the table as if she owned it. "I'm a senior investigator with the Fair Housing Enforcement Office of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I believe you received my email. I'm here to discuss case number concerning a complaint of disability discrimination filed by Mr. Last Name." "I believe you," she said, her gaze sweeping over Bob, the other two board members, and finally landing on Carol. "We're all party to the complaint." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It went from a stuffy, amateur hour HOA meeting to a federal deposition. The air crackled with tension. Bob looked like he was about to have a stroke. The other two board members suddenly found the grain of the Formica table absolutely fascinating. Only Carol looked undeterred, her fury now mixed with disbelief. Ms. Albright opened a slim portfolio. "Let's get straight to the point," she said. "The Fair Housing Act is not optional. It is a federal law. Your association's denial of Mr. Porter's last name's request for a reasonable modification for his daughter's disability, based on aesthetic concerns, is a clear violation of this law." Carol couldn't stop herself. She practically shot out of her chair. "But it's unsightly. It doesn't match. The bylaws, which he agreed to when he bought the house, clearly state that all permanent structures—" Miss Albright turned her head slowly to face Carol. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her calm was more intimidating than any shout. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dropping a degree and becoming as hard as steel, "let me be perfectly clear. The Fair Housing Act, a federal law enacted by the United States Congress, supersedes your community bylaws. Aesthetic preference is not, and has never been, a legal basis for denying a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability. Your personal opinion on what is unsightly is legally irrelevant." She let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "In fact, your initial denial, the subsequent levying of fines, and what I understand was a retaliatory and entirely baseless report to local law enforcement have opened this HOA and potentially its board members, individually, to significant civil and financial penalties." Bob made a small choking sound. "Individually?" he squeaked. "Interference and intimidation are serious offenses under the Act," Albright confirmed, her eyes still locked on Carol. "My official recommendation to my department will be based on your actions starting right now, and my recommendation to this board," she said, turning back to Bob, "is as follows. 1. You will issue a formal, written apology to Mr. Last Name and his daughter for the distress you have caused. 2. You will immediately and retroactively rescind all fines and expunge the violation notice from his record permanently. 3. The entire board and all committee heads will undergo mandatory FHA compliance training within the next 90 days at the HOA's expense. And 4. You will work with your legal counsel to amend your bylaws to include a specific, clear clause regarding the process for reasonable accommodations to ensure this never happens again. Failure to comply with any of this will result in my office pursuing the maximum penalties allowed under federal law. Am I understood?" The silence was deafening. Bob and the other two board members were nodding so vigorously I was worried their heads might fall off. But Carol, oh, Carol was not done. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered, her face turning a blotchy red. "What about our property values? He's ruining the character of the neighborhood." "Ms." Albright didn't even blink. "Your property values are worth zero if the HOA is bankrupted by federal fines and legal fees. Ma'am, the next words out of your mouth should be, 'I understand.'" Carol stared at her, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. But no sound came out. She had finally met an authority she couldn't challenge, a rulebook bigger than her own. Defeated, she sank back into her chair, her binder of bylaws lying useless on the table in front of her. Bob, seeing his chance, seized it. "We understand," he said quickly. "Completely. We will comply with everything. Alex, we are so sorry." I just sat there. I took a slow sip of the bottled water I'd brought, the picture of calm. Inside, I was doing a victory dance. It was over. Complete and total victory. A week later, I was relaxing in a lounge chair in my backyard, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. Propped up on the patio table next to me, displayed like a priceless piece of art, was the formal apology letter from the HOA, beautifully framed. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and in the pool, Maya was laughing, splashing a friend she'd made from down the street. The pool lift, our unsightly apparatus, glinted in the afternoon sun. It wasn't an apparatus, it wasn't an eyesore, it was a monument. A monument to the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys get to win. They say you can't fight City Hall, but it turns out you can absolutely fight the Sunnyvale Estates Homeowners Association, especially when you show up with the federal government as your backup. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement from the house next door. The curtain in Carol's sunroom, the one with the perfect view into my yard, twitched. I knew she was in there, watching. Stewing. A wicked grin spread across my face. I picked up my glass of iced tea. I raised it high in her direction, a silent, mocking toast. Then, I gave her a big, cheerful, five-fingered wave. The curtain snapped shut. "Hey, Dad," Maya called out from the pool, having seen the whole exchange. "You watching The Neighbor again?" I took a long, satisfying sip of my tea and leaned back in my chair, soaking in the piece. "Just admiring the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood, sweetie," I said. "The aesthetic harmony." Maya laughed, a sound full of pure, unadulterated joy. It echoed across our perfect, peaceful, and now permanently Karen-proofed backyard, and it was the sweetest sound in the world.